Punisher, Season 2, Episode 5, One-Eyed Jacks.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders. This is episode 210 of Defenders TV Podcast, where we're talking about The Punisher, Season 2, Episode 5, One-Eyed Jacks. I'm one of your hosts, Turk.
Hi, I am one of your other hosts, John.
And rounding out this trio, much like Madani, Amy/Rachel, and Frank, I am Chris.
So which one did that make me? Am I Frank? Because I'm in control this week?
I'm Madani.
Okay.
I'm a liar, so take it with that you will.
So you just have many, many names, Chris, that's all, right?
Today I should be known as Rachel.
Yes, today I am Dina Madani, and I am going to kill Rachel for using my credit card.
Well, we are here to talk about our spoiler-filled discussion of the 5th episode of Season 2 of The Punisher, One-Eyed Jacks. Really interesting episode, this one. They're back in New York. There's loads going on. There's a lot of spendage going on the old credit card. There. I would be very surprised if Madani doesn't set up a little alert in case anybody spends, $2 or $3 grand on a credit card on a new Surface tablet that gets delivered in the same day. That's got to be expensive, right?
That's pretty impressive. But what's less impressive is the fact that the credit card company didn't phone Madani to say that there was huge amounts of spend going on across New York.
She works in Homeland Security. Why does she not have two-factor authentication on some of her cards?
Exactly.
Seriously. Come on, Madani.
Oh, nobody does that, Chris. Everybody is told to do it. Nobody does it. And everything was being delivered to the same address, though, remember. So it wasn't that the shopping was happening all across the city. She was getting everything delivered to the house. So that
true.
maybe wouldn't throw up a huge flag for the credit card company. But let's not get into the details of credit card companies. It's just after Christmas. Nobody wants to talk about their credit card. I totally understand. Guys, I think it's time to get into our discussion about this episode. But, fellow Defenders, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. We are on all violent and gun-shy podcast catchers out there, including, obviously, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. If you want to listen to us, subscribe to us on there, and you'll get all of our episodes as they come out twice a week for this coverage of The Punisher. You can also pop over and join us on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV Podcast. And if you want to send us any thoughts about any of the episodes, what should they do, John?
Yes, please send in voicemails or email. You can go through our website at defenderstvpodcast.com to leave up to 90 seconds of voicemail. Just click on the right-hand side tab to leave your thoughts by voicemail, or go to feedback at defenderstvpodcast.com to email us in the traditional way.
So with all that, Derek, do you want to tell us some details behind this episode?
Yes, this episode was written by Dario Scardapane. He's written 2 episodes of Season 1 of The Punisher. He wrote Home and Resupply. This is his first of 2 episodes that he's writing for this season of The Punisher. And he also was a series producer and an executive producer for the last season of The Punisher. He's joined by Stacey Payson, who's the director of this episode. This is the first episode of The Punisher that she's directed, but she's been involved with episodes of TV shows like The Affair with Dominic West and House of Cards as well on Netflix. Dominic West, as everybody knows, came to fame in The Wire and also has played a Punisher character before. The awful, awful version of Jigsaw in the last film that was made. But great to have Stacey Payson on board for this episode, and great to have Dario Scardapane back. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the episode?
Sure. Billy Russo has been given safe harbourage by a compromised Dr. Dumont at her home as he begins to connect with former army veterans in New York. Meanwhile, Dina Madani begins to open up to Frank Castle and Curtis about Russo and her state of mind, as Amy begins to open up Madani's credit card as she goes on a spending spree. However, Frank goes on a spree of a different kind as he talks to Turk Barrett about the Russian war in New York, and then follows him to a gym in downtown New York. At the gym, Turk is forced into setting a trap to capture Frank, who the Russians believe killed their man Konchevsky in Chicago. However, it's not a trap if you know it's coming. That's Frank's philosophy, and he turns the tables and barbells on the Vor gang members as he extracts information. Elsewhere, the man in black, known as Pilgrim, plans his visit to the unholy land of New York in search of Frank Castle, Amy, and the pictures as he pays a deadly visit to the Russian gym in downtown.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Yeah, it seems like they're tying together a lot of the storylines in this episode, which is really well needed at this point in the show. We're 5 episodes in, so really good to see these bits from Chicago, the bits from Amy's past, and the bits that are going on in New York all tying together a little bit more in this episode. Let's get into our top 5 bullet points with bullet point number 1. Let's talk about Frank and Madani chatting about Billy Russo.
Yeah, because there's a few nightmares going on in here. We know that Billy Russo is having nightmares of the Punisher, or at least of the Skull. But we see here Madani waking from her own nightmare with the pre-injury Billy Russo staring at her. And that sets up this conversation that Madani has, not only with Frank and Amy, who's there to tell them about Billy, who killed Arthur, the old man, but also why she accepts Curtis's invitation to stay at the meeting of the former army veterans. So I really kind of like this because, in a sense, yes, Billy is haunted by the spectre of the Punisher, but Madani certainly is haunted by Billy Russo. You know, she was shot. She had her right-hand man and colleague Stein murdered by him. Someone she had a relationship with, she got intimate with. So this really is a form of a nightmare in her own right that Madani has. And I like the fact that she gets the chance to explain how she's feeling, how she sees it. At the moment we're seeing a lot of what Billy thinks, in relation to his scarring and that trauma that occurred there at the hands of Frank Castle, at the fairground on the Ferris wheel. But I really like that we're getting to hear about Madani because, she also went through quite a lot, really, to be honest.
Absolutely. Chris, I know this was something that you were looking for throughout this season, was a bit of Madani talking about her past and some of the things that have happened to her mental state as well. Do you think this served for that purpose?
I think in the last episode I was talking about how I think she was kind of starting to come out of it. So when she confronts Mahoney, it seemed like we were getting a bit more of the badass Madani back. With this nightmare, it's almost like we've taken a step back, or we've taken one step forward, 2 steps back to a degree.
Yeah, yep.
Because she does come in and she is aggravated and it's visible. She's starting to look haggard and tired and like she's not sleeping. Yeah. And now her clothes are still well pressed. When she comes in a hoodie, I'm going to get worried.
Yeah.
So while we do get this glimpse again of badass Madani, her mental state is starting to take a bashing and a half.
Yeah. It feels like she never dealt with it. I think that's kind of the issue, regardless of all of the work and the therapy that she would have gone through, that she would have been forced into by Homeland to take her job back or get her job back. It feels like she never dealt with it. So what we're seeing here is a lot of, you may see glimpses of Madani, the kick-ass person that works for Homeland, and then she will fall back on these other experiences. And luckily, I think having this moment where she's under attack, really, from the people around her at this meeting, kind of going, oh, who's the tourist? And then she gets her opportunity to share who she really is and what she feels she's done for America and done for the country and never gotten the credit for it, because everybody thinks, well, if you don't serve for the army and you don't serve for the Marines and you don't serve overseas, you're not protecting the country. And that's been her whole life. And she's put up with this and lost people and been shot herself as well. So I think it's a really great moment for Madani to have.
Yeah, I really like that, actually. I have to say, I think it's really important what Madani did in terms of calling out. I think it's Jake, the veteran who was at Dumont's surgery as well, and ultimately ends up drinking at the bar with Russo. But I really like the idea that, she says, I can deal with this. I can speak for myself. And that she then says, look, I get it. You went through something that makes you special and no one else can understand. But it's not exceptional, effectively, is what she's saying. Yes, it's different. Not everyone goes through that. And it results in a unique kind of post-event trauma in some respects, But I like the fact that she calls it out as that it's not unique. It's not just you that goes through that, and you don't have to be in a war-torn area to go through trauma. You can be, and it can be nothing to do with the military, like she was with Homeland, or it could be its colleagues on the front line in cities who are being shot at or lose a partner. So I really like that she kind of called that out as, stop thinking you're exceptional, effectively, despite the unique set of circumstances that lead to what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
For me, it was her graphic description of being shot that really kind of landed at home for the group. In particular for Jake, the army vet who we met in Dr. Dumont's place, but also in the support group. My God, New York is small. I'm just going to say that. It's like, there's only one support group and one therapy doctor and psychologist in all of New York.
Well, it is the best support group, without a doubt. I have to say, there's a great moment that I have to call out from Curtis Hoyle as she's talking to Madani, and Madani's trying to get more information out of him. I love that moment when you see the guys coming in for their support group, and he goes, Madani, you're either going to have to join it or you're going to have to leave and come back to me afterwards, because if I tell these guys they've got to wait on you, then I'm treating them the way they feel they're being treated all the time, as second-class citizens, and I'm not willing to do that. It's a great moment where you feel the ownership that Curtis has for this group and what he's doing for them as the leader of this group, the trust that they have in him to be there for them whenever they need him. It's a lovely moment just to set up that character again. He was great in season 1. I think he disappeared towards the end of the season. We wanted to see a lot more of, and I'm really glad they brought him back for this season as well.
Yeah, no, same here. And I want to see where it goes. Will he be forced to confront Billy himself and stop playing guard duty in his own apartment?
Maybe, but there is some really fun stuff that happens in the background to this episode. We'll talk about it a little bit more as we get into just the extra points here, but really it ends off with himself and Madani kind of forming a little bit more of an alliance. I like that we didn't really know that they'd never seen each other in the last season. They bring that up immediately. They feel like they are strongly connected with each other because, well, both of them were shot by Billy last season, so they feel like they're really connected, the two characters, and we're starting to see them build up a relationship. And Madani says to him, if you do find any information about Billy, I'm hoping that you're going to tell me first and not somebody else, And technically, that's kind of what happens. Curtis is still sharing information with Frank. He's already met up with Frank before Madani comes anywhere near him, so he's still friends with Frank.
I just love how Frank is turning into Voldemort. He who should not be named, and we will just sidetrack we will not mention that one name. I'm just like, okay. It's just like, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that guy?
Yeah.
Hey,
just in case there's a bug in New York and we get taken down by him or by anybody else.
And to be honest, his face is getting battered so much, I expect him not to have a nose as well soon enough, like Voldemort.
Frank, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Let's get on to bullet point number 2, guys. The shopping spree. Amy and Madani's credit card, right? Let's just talk a little bit about Amy. She has things to do in this episode, not a huge amount. I always kind of find it difficult when you have this character who's just sitting in the background of everything else that's going on. But we have a little bit of exposition, I suppose, where we see her ability to palm things. So she's showing off this 3-card Monty trick to Frank and really plays him over and over again.
Yeah.
It seems like she's putting herself in a really dangerous position with Frank because he's getting more and more frustrated, even when she teaches him the gag of what you should be looking for, and then still pulls the wool over his eyes 3 more times. And Frank is getting more and more aggressive that she is changing the game so that he can't win. And that's what she's trying to teach him, is the only way to win the game is not to play. And Frank goes, or make sure you're the dealer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that for me was the best teachable moment. You could have done this whole piece with just like a piece of dialogue.
Yep.
But the decision to do this about 3-card Monty it was interesting. I was trying to figure out where it was, because she just kept repeating the only way to win is not to play. And I was like, okay, so this is what they're setting up. And then that last line delivered by Frank makes you go, oh, so this is how they're going to do it. Frank's going to become the dealer. He's going to start palming quote unquote things.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I liked how it played into effectively his circumvention of the surprise attack by the Russians on him as well. That it was his trick here, that he played a sleight of hand in that he followed Turk Barrett and saw what was going down. So I really liked that moment. But I mean, I have to say this for me was one of the whole credit card montage that really happened in this was kind of, I just didn't quite get Amy's rationale here. I just kind of was like, if I was Madani, I would have chucked you out of the apartment, and probably not through the door, through a window. I mean, you know, she's been given safe harborage here.
Yeah.
And next thing she's, nicking her credit card. I didn't get it. I didn't get it. And, you know, just to say that it's because Madani isn't happy about anything, well, she's going to be even less happy after this. So, I mean, I don't know. I just didn't understand why this was inserted into this episode.
And those are all things that Frank says to her. I totally agree with you. There's definitely, you know, you would have an alert on your card, but, you know, she does say that Madani wouldn't notice this kind of stuff. Madani's been completely out of connection, I suppose, while she's over with Curtis and sitting in that support group. So she's not going to notice this money going during that day. Apparently all of this stuff gets delivered in New York. As I said, a $2,000 computer or a $1,000 Microsoft Surface computer being delivered within an hour of purchase to an apartment on somebody's credit card. I'm not too sure whether you can get that done even in New York, whether they get them delivered that quickly, but maybe they do. I don't know. But even with that, she's probably spent a couple of grand. I'm sure really the whole reason for this is because they need some way to explain why Frank and Amy are going to be wearing clothes that fit them in the next episode without actually being out in public and standing underneath cameras in public locations. So they can explain that by her stealing the credit card. It's a bit of exposition turned into a moment for Amy in the episode. But you're right, it feels totally unnecessary. It feels like she could have just said it in a line rather than having a whole storyline about it that's never going to come back.
It just felt really kind of evil. It was kind of like, what are you doing? And I mean, there was that moment when Madani comes back to the apartment at the end and Amy and Frank have left, taken everything, and then there's the credit card with all the kind of receipts. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, Madani just really cut a very lonely figure. And maybe there's a point in that I can grasp, you know, that Madani has kind of exposed herself, you know, and really tried to open up about her feelings and about the impact of Russo on her. And she's coming back to an apartment where she's alone and she's still having to deal and face all of that still on her own. And, you know, because even with Raffi, her boss, you know, she says she did the minimum amount of psych counseling that she needed to get back into the job.
Yeah. I wish there was more of an intention. I really don't think there was. I think that was just simply to show that she's come back to her apartment and the credit card is still there and the receipts are still there. I don't think there was anything deeper than that. Unfortunately, I think it was just simply a bit of exposition that they turned into a scene, sadly.
I think it was really done just to reinforce Amy's background as a con man. Mm-hmm. That plus the 3-part Monty show that she kind of is not a bad person, but like more she's used to living off the wealth of others. Mm-hmm. So she sees she does not see a moral issue with stealing Madani's credit card because Madani is never happy and she has all the money anyway.
Yeah.
What she
can afford it anyway. Yeah.
So I think it was just that. Yes, it was used for exposition, but it also used as to show the characters' kind of, I don't know, alignment for those of us who play D&D. It's basically she's chaotic neutral, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Oh no, she's definitely bad. She's definitely got an evil streak in her. Yes, definitely that is part of the character of Amy that we've seen in the past. She's a grifter. She's somebody that's willing to use all of her tricks to get whatever she wants out of the situation. But you're right, it does feel really inconceived if we're going to like this character 5 episodes in and we see her taking a hell of a lot of money off Madani, who's a character we like from season 1, so we don't really want to see her get all of her stuff stolen off her. But anyway, let's move on to our point number 3. We've talked about Dumont's house a little bit earlier on, but this is all about the safe house that Dr. Dumont has created for Billy here. Billy wakes up kind of freaking out. We saw that scene, actually, I think the scene themselves, the two of them put together with Billy having his nightmare, once again probably about the mask, and Madani having her nightmare about Billy. It was a really interestingly put together scene, having both of them having their nightmares at the same time, so you couldn't tell which nightmare was whose in a way. I thought that was really well put together. But we do have Billy waking up and completely freaking out with Dumont, and Dumont using a really interesting technique to get him to calm down, just get him to focus on 5 blue things in the room, and you see him using that technique to calm down and get himself back to a place where he's able to focus on the right thing again. Will this relationship last for a very long time, do you think? I
think so. We get that hint that Dumont has problems herself. when she's filling up the water glass for Billy.
Yeah.
We see 5 cuts on her arm.
Yeah.
We see multiple cuts going up to where her sleeve comes down as well, so they may go higher. Yeah, we see a number of cuts. Yeah.
So we see that she is troubled herself.
Yeah.
And then they don't look fresh, so maybe she was more troubled. But I think this is there. I think we will get some version of the Harlequin or Hardy, Dr. Quinzel, and the Joker kind of relationship, where over time she'll come to more rely on Billy, but she's actually thinking the one that she's there to help Billy.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going. But I think because of her illnesses, because we also, and I'm kind of skipping ahead, but at the end, or midway towards the end of the episode, we find that she has an extreme fear of heights, kind of vertigo. Cause it was very strange. I didn't know what was happening. So we see her kind of breathing deeply. She paces, then she opens up her curtains to see the window, and then she slowly starts stepping towards it.
Yeah.
And placing her hand. And I thought for a second that the window was open, and that she was like going to try and kind of off herself by jumping through a window. But then actually it's just, we see that kind of camera trick where it kind of pans in and out and fades and kind of blurs it. And we see that that's also a problem. So maybe they're starting to hint at her own problems from previous kind of times.
So this is where I was thinking that your theory may be right, Chris.
Oh, can I get that in writing?
Well, they have it.
Note
recorded.
this, fellow defenders. For once, Derek is agreeing with me.
It's even better. Just purely because I think someone that has all of these problems may have issues being a therapist in a hospital with someone of an extreme condition like Billy's. If she has been self-harming and she has issues with vertigo, or at the very least a fear of heights, an extreme fear of heights, which is debilitating and keeps her indoors in her apartment at times, I'm not too sure whether you would be employed by the state to go and help people out in a hospital that have psychotic tendencies, which is probably as close as you get to the diagnosis of Billy in my head, I suppose. So I'm wondering, has she been employed by somebody else to use the techniques that she used to have as a doctor, that she's no longer a recognized doctor because of the problems she's gone through, and somebody else has been using her to deal with Billy? Of course, she is dealing with somebody else. She's dealing with Jake in this episode as well. So not too sure whether that theory really pays off, but it was where it got me questioning and where it got me kind of going, maybe Chris is right. Maybe there is something else here. Maybe she's being used by somebody else because she has these problems, and they're covering them up to let her keep her license if she works with Billy, something like that. But I think there's some interesting stuff in there. But once again, these are things that are going to pay off probably in future episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of really plays to the fact that she is covering up stuff that has happened in her life that may prevent her from being the best therapist in the world. And in which case, that chimes with Billy.
Yeah.
And in that sense, maybe her helping Billy out, where she takes him in, is because she sees elements of her in him. You know, whether it's down to the disfigurement from her arm in his face, or whether it's because she knows that he has covered up aspects of his life previously, and it was trawled through the media and the news. You know, she might know him a bit like Jake does because of the press coverage that he's got. So, I think it makes more sense for me that she would be doing this with Billy, keeping him safe, buying him clothes, even though she knows it's not the right thing to do, even though she says to him as well when he asks, that you know you'll be in serious trouble if we're caught. And she agrees with him, but she's still doing it. So I think from some of these things that we see in this episode, like the scars, like the vertigo, or the fear of outdoors, that she can empathize with Billy's predicament.
Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of a Bonnie and Clyde or a Thelma and Louise moment that kind of comes in here with Billy, where Dumont brings him some new clothes so he's able to kind of move about a little bit, and it doesn't look like he's wearing, hospital scrubs anymore. But then he reveals to her, I'll never go back into custody. They will never be able to make me go back in. And And she's kind of trying to tell him that he's not the only person that's been felt let down and not the only person that's gone through things like this. And he just kind of says, but it's different for me because whatever it is that got you into those situations, you can remember that thing and you can move on from it. I can't remember what it was that got me in here. I can't remember what it is that messed up my brain. So I'm never going back in to pay for something that I don't even remember doing is basically the attitude. So you kind of get a little bit of an idea that Dumont and Billy are willing to run away together, and Dumont is already aware that Billy will go down all guns blazing if he needs to, or kill himself, rather than being taken back up. So I'm getting a little bit of a, as I say, a Bonnie and Clyde or a Thelma and Louise kind of thing out of that discussion that they have.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Jake, who's the other person that's in the house here, because I think this is going to be the big arc, really, for Billy for the season.
Yeah, I think this is the start of him connecting and probably recruiting people to a group that he has. For what end? I presume at some point it may be because his memory does return or the connections reform. But until that happens, to what end, I don't know. But, we see them connect at McFeeney's bar, where we have them drinking whiskey, we have them drinking beer and having that kind of conversation about being a veteran. And I think it was something you said as well, Derek, and that idea that Jake, you don't really get this very often in TV series sometimes, that people like Billy Russo or indeed Frank Castle fly under the radar despite all of this press coverage that is shown within the series. And we have that moment where Jake says, I knew who you were the first moment I saw you. Yeah. I'm right behind you. I agree with you, So that was a nice moment, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that just happens twice in this episode. You just don't get to see it normally in comics or in TV shows or in movies at all. These are two people that would be hugely well known to the population of New York, especially former veterans in New York. They would absolutely know who Frank Castle is, and they'd absolutely know who Billy Russo is. Billy Russo's picture must have been plastered all over the news after the big shootout that happened in New York. Frank Castle obviously went to court and had the biggest trial of the century. So of course the Russians are going to go, what's the Punisher got to do with my business? Loads of people are going to know these people on site. So I'm glad they've used that. I'm glad they've kept that continuity, for want of a better word, that these people would be well known across the city.
Yeah, and don't forget as well, Billy was the one who was also recruiting ex-military, former veterans into the security force. Mm-hmm. So he was taking ex-Marines. I think, is this guy the Air Force? Is Jake Air Force? Something about flying. So I got... or an understanding, maybe paratrooper or something. He's not a Marine anyway. I don't know what arm of the American army or the American military force he is part of. Mm-hmm. But I got he's definitely not the same as Billy and Frank.
There is some discussion about would you drink with a Marine, is what Billy says to him. You're right. So he is saying to him, I'm a different designation than you, but we're still both former army or former armed forces, so we'll drink together kind of thing. Yeah. I'm wondering with this guy, Jake, is anybody else getting shades of an older, at least, and more experienced version of Lewis from season 1? Season 1, the character Lewis was the guy that was wanted to take down society because of how he was treated after coming back from the war and not being allowed to go back into the army again. This guy doesn't want to go back to the army. We hear that, when he says he wants to stop drinking because he's getting really drunk, and Billy's going, well, you don't have to get up at 5 a.m. again. And he goes, never, not for the rest of my life. But he does miss the camaraderie, and he does absolutely hate looking around at the people that he fought for. As he says, these people in a bar getting drunk, taking selfies of each other are the worst kind of people to this guy, Jake. He's going, they don't respect the freedom that we fought to give them. And that great line from Billy of, what if all of us stood up at the same time together? We could really do something in this country. We could take over this country. It's real fighting line and fighting moment, where they're drawing a parallel between the two of them and what everybody else that's done and fought for the freedoms of the country would do if they stood up together at one time. It's a really interesting moment, I think.
Yeah, I definitely see the parallels between the previous, for Lewis, from the previous season. I'm hoping they go somewhere different with it because I don't want literally Jake to be Lewis 2.0, if you want to call it that.
I think what we're seeing big difference, and that's probably why I'm enjoying it a bit more, is this isn't a lone person going out bombing and killing people. This is already forming relationships between these people to form a new group or a new organization of effectively terrorists, which is what they'll be seen as if they do form a group like this. But I do like seeing that kind of side of things with Billy forming these relationships. He seems so much more confident when he walks into the bar than we've seen him for the last 4 episodes as well, I thought. When you see Rousseau walk into the bar, he looks like he has a mission and knows what he wants to do, whereas the last couple of episodes he looked kind of shy and reserved and almost fearing of himself and what he can do, but it feels like he's found a kindred spirit in Jake.
Definitely. Although I really like the fact that he stumbles with the flashbacks during that moment. I agree. I think, you really see him having come on and progressed. Even as Madani said, you just see him progress, and you've seen that happen, but there is that moment where I do like that he stumbles because he gets those flashes of the Punisher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm even wondering if they're going to set up a Punisher-like vigilante group. I'm not just speculating here now, and I'm kind of like, I just want to get to the meat of the meat and the two bones, because they could go 100 different directions with this, and that's, again, it's towards the end of the episode, so it drives you to go, oh, okay, where are we going with this? Mm-hmm. And actually, it brings us on to our next point, because this episode really did pick up the pace again after quite a slow episode, I think. Mm-hmm. Last episode in comparative terms. So this kind of brings us back to the action. It brings us back to kind of the storylines where we want to go. So bullet point number 4 is Frank's off to the gym. The Russian gym?
Yes. And we get our special appearance this season, because we didn't get him in Daredevil, as we said, in Daredevil Season 3. Turk Barrett is back. And I love the interaction between Frank and Turk. I really do. I think it's so intriguing. I love that Frank goes, well, I need to know where these guys are. And this guy, Turk, I don't care how legitimate he might feel he is now, he's still going to be my connection to the Russians. I think it's really good seeing the two of them together again.
Yeah, right there. And I'm glad we saw him.
Yeah.
This was really good to see Turk Barrett. And I just really like how he just plays it. It's just so good. I mean, whether it's from him realizing that Frank's on the back seat of his car going, oh no, not you. And Frank's like, yes, me. To, the end post the fight in the gym with the Russians, where he's like, do I have to see you again anytime soon? And Frank's like, no, you don't. Because I just love his reaction to what's going on, which is effectively, I'm just going to stare at the wall because this is so brutal. Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, an open question, and I mean, it's a legitimate one from me. Was this gym fight too brutal? Was it maybe slightly heading over the edge in terms of the brutality of it, in particular the weight to the man's face? There was part of me that did kind of want to stop watching what was going on, because it seemed a little too on the nose, no pun intended, of course.
Yeah, I think you know my feelings about this, John. It did go too far for me in this episode. There's points when you can just move the camera away from the screen. You don't have to show someone's face caved in with a weight. It's not necessary to get across the point that Frank has knocked this guy to the ground and he's probably not getting back up. I just think it just strayed a little bit too far into that territory. I watch things like The Walking Dead. I watch those type of shows where people die all the time on screen. Seeing someone getting punched in the face repeatedly until their skull breaks, it's just a little too far for TV for me. Personally,
I'm a bit of a yes/no on this. Did I need to see it? No. Was there a reason? Yes. And I think the reason is twofold. One, they're going for, this is an over-the-top, R-rated, violent Punisher. So from a directorial decision, it makes sense to show the impact of the weight of Frank's fights.
Yeah. But it's not R-rated, and they're still installing the L-shaped bed sheets that you have hated for all of these shows since season 1, you know. This is a show that's 16 plus is the rating that's on Netflix, or 15s, I think, over here. So, I think the violence that's in here is probably the level of violence that would be edited out if it was on the big screen in the cinema. I don't think anybody ever gets to watch all 13 episodes of this to tell them to cut elements of it to reduce the violence slightly. There's just a tiny touch too far on that scene for me. Yeah, I don't think you needed to see the face caved in completely as it fell to the ground. I know the guy isn't real. I know it was just a dummy, obviously, but it just felt just that touch over the boundary that I would deem for the show. It's still based on a comic book at the end of the day. There's still people going to tune into it and go, I've read Punisher comics. That's grand. It's a very different thing seeing it on screen, though.
I think I would agree. I think with Chris, there's part of me that kind of was like, oh, I think they've maybe just gone a bit too far here. Yet this is the Frank Castle for this show. He is uncompromising and he is brutal, and there is that moment in a fight that inner sort of wolf and the Punisher comes out, and that's exactly what he did here, was punish. I think just generally, the flow of this fight in the gym was really, really good.
I'd agree.
I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah. And I think as well for this Russian gym, this did become the glue, I think, for this show so far. Whether it was at the end with the Pilgrim arriving in New York, or whether it's with Turk, effectively getting into hot water because of him knowing about Chicago and Konchevsky and everything. This is kind of the glue that's starting to link what happened in Chicago with Amy, with this fight with Frank, with the reason why the Man in Black is coming to New York.
Yeah.
So it's a little focal center, an important plot point within the story. So I did like the scenes here in the Russian gym. I thought it really added to the story, and I thought the fight really lifted this episode, actually, in terms of giving something to talk about, because there was, other aspects of this episode where it felt slow for me. So I'm glad that they brought this in.
Yeah, agreed. And I will say the one thing that I also have a problem with, and I know, Chris, you're saying that there's a reason for it. I think the one problem with the scene I have is actually there's no reason for it. There's a moment right at the beginning that they're having the conversation when Frank arrives at the Russian gym and the guy goes, I don't want Punisher in my business. I don't know why you're even here. And they work out over the course of 2 lines of dialogue that they're both looking for the same people, and neither of them are involved in what they're looking for. So Frank hasn't killed Konchevsky, and they didn't kill Konchevsky. They're both looking. So they could have worked together. I know that was unlikely. They could have worked together, or Frank could have beaten them up enough to get the information.
Yeah.
But there's no reason for Frank to kill all of them, because these are not the people he's after. Frank's killing them because it's the Punisher and they're criminals, but that's not something that's been established in this show, that's the Punisher, that he will just kill anybody who's a criminal. That's not where it is. I do also feel really sorry for poor Turk in this, and I slightly mentioned it, but the deal for Turk was that he was to get 25% of whatever he negotiated, so he got no money because no money was negotiated. And the actual deal that was there for him was either he runs his mouth enough to stay alive, or the Russians kill him. That's basically the deal that was there, and he wasn't told that was the deal until after it happened. What if he hadn't been able to run his mouth? He's been legitimate now for a year or so. What if he hadn't been able to run his mouth enough for the Russians to go into this trap that Frank had set up? I guess Frank knows him really well, so that wasn't a risk, but it seemed like a pretty big risk to take. Yeah,
his poor shop was broken into as well. Mm-hmm. Because they broke in with all the guys, the other side of the Russian army broke in. Yeah. I just want to actually refer back to episode 2, right? Mm-hmm. When I talked about, I think the violence in this show now and what they're showing us is to show the impact of Frank, right? In the fight in episode 1, we see the bystanders getting hurt. Like when bullets are flying, we see the bouncer, we see just a random person get shot instead of Frank. And I think they're continuing to a degree with that through. which is we see the cop get the gut shot. We see in this, it's, yes, they could have not shown us the level of gore that they did show us. But I think what they're doing is going, yeah, well, if Frank comes in and beats the hell out of you, this is the level that he would beat you up.
Yeah.
And this is the visible gore and violence that would happen. Yeah. And I think it's just, potentially you're right. Potentially they could have shown it off screen, without actually showing the dummy. But I think that was just a choice to show that, yeah, when the Punisher hits you in the face with a weight multiple times, this is what you're going to end up looking like.
I think we would have known that we're all fans of action movies. We're all, grew up in the 80s and 90s. We've seen loads of action movies. There's a point in action movies where everything changed, and it was when Sylvester Stallone came back and made the Rambo sequel, John Rambo. And his whole purpose in that movie was to kill everything and to show everything on screen that was possible. It was an absolute mess of a film, and they just showed dummies being exploded in every scene with blood flying everywhere for the entire thing, to the point where it became one of those movies where they had the counter going, and a YouTube version of it where they had the counter of all of the bodies that were killed throughout the film, all the people that were killed throughout the film by John Rambo, and then it was the highest body count ever, that kind of thing. I don't want the Punisher to have to rely on these kind of gags as ways to get people through an episode. I don't want them to go, oh, well, if I sit around 5 more minutes, maybe I'll see somebody's ears being pulled off. Maybe that's going to be the gag for the next episode. They don't need to rely on that. He's a violent guy. We know that. The fight scene itself was pretty great. As you said, John, the movements of the fight as he goes through it are fantastic, showing the brutal fighter that he is, not the stylized dance-type fighter that we get sometimes with Daredevil or got sometimes with Iron Fist. He's a brutal, brutal fighter. But that moment, I think, was just pushing it too far so they could push the boundaries. That's all it felt to me. But again, personal feeling. So,
at the end of this, we do get a name. Nikolai Polodesny. It takes us, in my head, I'm like, who is that? Do we know anything? We find out when Frank gets back and he speaks to Amy before they move from Madani's. She Googles it. I'm expecting, he's a Russian mobster. He's not going to be just online. And she Googles it, and it turns out to be this ex-Russian military, I can't predict what arm of the military, but essentially now he's a real estate owner and lives in New York.
Yes.
Which is quite handy since they're in New York. Yeah. So the guys set out of Madani's, they leave the credit card, and we get them essentially walking into the sunset, but no, it's them walking down the street, sharing a bonding moment about Madani being unhappy.
Yeah. So was this a gag? Was this a joke from the Russian mobster who gave them the name and then said, look him up on the internet, when Frank didn't know who he was? And then they'd look him up on the internet and find him instantly on Wikipedia. Is that just the joke? Is that the joke that I didn't laugh at? Because I am genuinely going, they actually did look him up on the internet. Maybe he was giving them the right information.
I think it was just one of those kind of it's supposed to be almost like one of the Russian oligarchs in the US that kind of run around with millions of dollars. And I think it was supposed to be a gag on that. Yeah. Or one of the kind of the only way is Essex for our UK listeners style people. It's you don't know who this is. How out of touch are you? Or it's a joke on any other kind of show would go, well, let me check the web. Let me check the CIA files. Yeah. And they tap on the computer a few minutes and then all of a sudden they have this information, and it's actually, well, you could just go to Wikipedia because most things are on the internet now.
Yeah, it's like Abramovich, isn't it? Really, huge amount of wealth. Not entirely sure where it's come from, but probably owns a football club.
Yeah. And just also important to mention that Amy and Frank were given 24 hours to leave the city by Madani because she realized they couldn't help her with the Billy situation. And what they've actually done is left her apartment and gone in to move into a place that Curtis organized for them. So despite all the conversations that Madani had with Curtis to tell her the information first, he's actually handed off the information to Frank of a place to stay while he's in the city, while he takes down the Russians. So importantly, they're not telling Madani they're staying, and Frank's going, it'll be fine. She won't even notice people's faces exploding in gyms and won't connect it to me at all. It'll be grand.
One point on that is actually Frank's still saying, actually, he's not saying he can't help her. He's saying he won't at this point.
She's saying he can't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she's saying you can't just go off and kill him. So I think we're going to get a point where that will flip. And I think that's when the Punisher is unleashed on Billy. We'll get that kind of Frank, go punish, or something silly. I'd love if they went super comic book like that. She calls him up and goes, Frank, go Punisher mode. Or
maybe she will do that. I'm not too sure if that's what she meant, though. I think she's saying you're not going to help me out because you've got this whole other deal going on. And unless you solve this whole thing with the Russians, you're not going to help me with this Billy thing. You basically just used me to get you from Michigan to New York. You're not here to deal with Billy at all, are you? You know, that's what it felt like, more than I don't want you to help me. Does that make sense? Or did I misread that differently?
I took it that she knows this other kind of side story is going on. I think she's just like, well, you're distracted.
Because it's when Amy slips up and says to her, maybe you could help us out. Since this Billy thing won't get sorted, you can help us out and maybe deport these Russians. And Frank goes, Amy, shut it. She doesn't know anything about the Russians. Shut up.
Madani is obviously like, I don't want you doing your Punisher thing.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to be punishing people.
Exactly.
Or a vigilante anymore. So, I think it's like, let's go off and solve your thing and come back to me. So, go solve your thing so you're freed up. I think it's more, I don't want you working on that thing, so get out of town.
Yeah, exactly.
With that, we move on to our fifth and final point for this, which is the Unholy Land. The Pilgrim Comes to New York. How good does that sound as a title for a movie? This is like, the Unholy Land, the Pilgrim Comes. You could have that on a poster. It would look brilliant.
That is pretty good. I must say, I really loved the imagery around the Pilgrim, the new name for the Man in Black, because it was just so cool. I mean, that final image of him coming out of the Russian gym in that kind of moonlight, just so iconic, I thought, actually. And I really enjoyed him with the Schultzes either side holding the hands, you know, as they kind of give him this mission to go off into the unholy land of New York with all its dodginess, crime, and immorality as they view it. So I must say I really enjoyed the whole the way he was framed within the shots. I just thought it was really iconic, actually. And I think the actor Josh Stewart, who plays the Pilgrim, his presence, he just projects really, really well. And I find him really scary. It's that silent but deadly look that you have. And yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to cross him either.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the flagellating bit, but it did remind me, that scene reminded me directly out of Da Vinci Code.
Right.
Where we saw Paul Bettany, who was the monk in that, kind of whipping himself too.
Yeah. Self-flagellation is one of those really, really scary things that is used a lot in movies to indicate how
unhinged
far a Christian person has gone. You know, it's been something that was used in medieval times, something that's always used to show full extremism, because it's connected with someone self-flagellating, someone beating themselves, basically punishing themselves for the fact that they were born with sin. So most Catholic and most Christian teachings teach you that, you know, you have your baptism and then original sin is gone. If you believe in that side of the Catholic teachings, you have your baptism, your original sin is gone, and then from then on, whatever sins you commit, you apologize for them in confession. Whereas when you're spending your entire life believing that you're always a sinful being and flagellating yourself, beating yourself for it, you know you've gone into full extremism here. And it always is scary when they use it in films.
Yeah, and this, in my opinion, is just used to show how fanatical.
Yeah.
Literally, it was a scene just to show how fanatical of a religious zealot, and I'm careful using that word, but he is, like, I could see if you took the Lord's name in vain in front of him, which I'm assuming will happen at some point in this, he will automatically kill you.
Right.
Like, I think they're going to show how it was literally a device for that.
Yeah.
Because we do then see when the Schultzes arrive, and the Eliza goes up and to visit Pilgrim's wife, and she's showing her support. And the wife is saying she's made peace with everything except one thing. We don't actually find out what that is, which is interesting. I'm wondering if it's their backstory life. It will come. We know that this information come. But I'm more interested to see how they're using the Pilgrim.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what's really important in this scene is the moment when Anderson is telling the Pilgrim his mission and telling him that Frank and the girl are in New York. So again, they know who Frank is. They still aren't sure exactly who the girl is, but they know they're in New York. And Anderson Schultz is saying you need to go back to New York, and I know how difficult it's going to be for you because of how despicable the streets are. So it's almost like Anderson Schultz believes that when the former Man in Black, when the Pilgrim arrives in New York, he'll get out of his car and he'll just punish everybody in the city for their wayward ways and will never find his way to Frank because there's just too much grime and dirt in the city of New York, is the way it's kind of comes across. Just to point out, actually, because we haven't even mentioned it, sorry, in the subtitles for the episode, that's where the name The Pilgrim comes in. That's where we saw it. For one of our fellow defenders mentioned it in their feedback last episode, and absolutely right. It doesn't change anything. The Pilgrim is not a character from the comic book, so we're not spoiling anything by calling him the Pilgrim. It's just a much easier name than the Man in Black, because I know people were probably confusing that with Johnny Cash. This is not Johnny Cash, different guy. So we're going to call him the Pilgrim from now on. That's what the subtitles say, so we'll leave it at that anyway.
Yeah, and I that's the interesting thing. I've been spending a while now trying to figure out who this potential Man in Black, Pilgrim, now we're calling him Pilgrim, who he was. Is he pulled from previous? Is he amalgamation? It looks like he's a completely made for TV, made for this season, made for the show character. Yeah. And I'm okay with that. That's the good thing.
Absolutely. And I don't want to research it too much just in case it turns out that there is actually a person like that. So I've done a top level research. There's nobody called Pilgrim, nobody with this type of backstory in the comic books. And I don't want to push it too far in case somebody goes, well, actually, in episode 8, they called him this, and that character is someone from the comic book. So we'll leave it there at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do get we get kind of two more kind of beats with the Pilgrim. Mm-hmm. We get him speaking to his wife, talking about how he has to go to New York and he's going to do this. And she promises that she will still be alive if he goes quickly and does his work quickly.
Yes.
So this does lead me to believe, even though she's being treated by the Schultz, or will be soon treated by the Schultz, that she is terminal, something is going on, that she probably has days, hours to live, type of thing. And that's why the Pilgrim is doing everything for the Schultz. So it's not like she's just sick. She is terminal with days, moments, hours to live, and the Schultz have just dangled in front of Pilgrim an experimental treatment that could save her.
Maybe. I'm not too sure whether it's that. Maybe. She says that they actually are treating her already. That everything that's happened so far is what they've done for her. And then she promises she'll still be alive when he arrives and waiting for him, but I don't think she promises to be alive much longer than that. So it feels like they have talked her into explaining to Pilgrim that he has to go on the mission and she will still be there waiting for him when he gets back, but not much longer, because it feels like he never would have left at all if he thought she was going to die while he was gone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but we also remember back in episode 1, 2, where the Schultz are talking to Pilgrim, when Anderson is talking to Pilgrim, he does go, I'm trying to get you this treatment. We're trying to get that sorted. So it's kind of, I'm getting that this is how they play the marionette with the Pilgrim.
Maybe.
They dangle the kind of medical aid. But he goes anyway. He does go, which is great. And we do get this pop in the gym.
Yeah.
And we see a Pilgrim walk out of the saloon. That was my worst Western impression. But yeah, he comes out putting some form of gun back into his coat pocket, which it must be the thinnest gun in the world because it didn't bulge that much. He has quite a tight jacket fitted at the top. And then he walks out and he has his hand in his jacket, obviously like reholstering. But it's kind of, he doesn't have much room to hide stuff in there. So I'm like, that's a thin gun.
purpose built, obviously. Purpose.
Yes.
Obvious.
Yeah, I like the shooting. I like the kind of, as you say, Chris, the pop, 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 in the gym. Down go the Russians, I presume. Those that did survive Frank, certainly didn't survive, the Pilgrim. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to see, how he wreaks a bit of, havoc on the streets of New York, really, tearing it up to try and find Amy these pictures. And seemingly from his side, Frank Castle, who is a bit of a passion project, it would seem, in terms of his motivation for tracking him down. Although it's interesting, as you say, that Anderson Schultz also says, they know that he's in New York.
Yeah.
And I presume that the Pilgrim quite enjoyed popping off the Russians. He probably, given his tattoos that have been taken off his body, the ex kind of far right and Nazi tattoos, he probably thinks that all the Russians are Soviets that need to be put down. So he probably does see the spiritual side in this as well.
Maybe. That's it for our top 5 points for this episode of Punisher. One-Eyed Jacks. No major notes. Obviously, the term One-Eyed Jacks is a reference to the Jacks, the one that look towards you, only have one eye towards you on a deck of cards. Reference to the game that Amy and Punisher are playing. Anything else in this episode, Chris, that you might have picked up?
Nothing from my side. Again, it's a very Easter egg scarce couple of episodes we've seen so far.
I think we noticed from season 1 and from the reaction from people that were watching it that it's not one aimed at comic book fans as such. They've taken some of the main characters from the comic books and they're aiming it at a different audience, and definitely this season feels like a continuation of that idea rather than going back to the comics to pick up storylines. Let's get on to our defense. Chris, do you defend The Punisher season 2 episode 5, One-Eyed Jacks?
I defend this a hell of a lot more than episode 4.
Right.
Because it did pick up the pace again for me. So, as I said in episode 4, that was Basil Exposition episode, where we slowed things down. We're going to give you a lot more story beats and understanding of the characters. And actually, that may have been the intention, but actually, it just slowed the pace down too much. Whereas this episode gave us a good fight scene, comparatively, and depending on your viewpoint. It gave us more backstory. It gave us a better understanding of where the characters actually are in terms of mental state, health, things like that. Introduced a few more questions that we really want to answer, and gave us Turk as well, which is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
So I defend this a lot more than I did episode 4.
Yeah. Excellent. John, do you defend The Punisher season 2 episode 5, One-Eyed Jacks?
I do defend this episode of The Punisher. I have to say, I would have said before we had our discussion podcast here that I would have just defended it. I'm a little more on the defend side of this episode after our chit-chat here. I'd give it 3.5 bruised, battered and bloody thumbs up out of 5 for me. I think there's a lot of important stuff in here, actually, centered around the Schultzes and the Pilgrim and with the Russian Jim, as well as there being a lot of character importance here with Madani, Russo, really beginning to find themselves a bit. Madani because of her opening up to Curtis and to Frank and Amy, and also Russo in terms of this connection back with someone from the military, a veteran, someone he can connect with. So I really like that. I think it ties a lot of stuff together, really. Both the Russians, Amy, the Pilgrim, and for Madani and Russo to Frank. So I really like this. We also get Turk Barrett as well. So I really enjoyed that. The fight scene was excellent, although, I loved the reaction of Turk to the fight, and in some ways that was also a bit like mine as well. I did kind of, at some stages, want to just start to look at the wall and maybe rock slightly because of what was going on. But this is definitely a thumbs up and a defend for me as well. So Derek, do you defend this episode of Punisher Season 2, One-Eyed Jacks?
I'm on the cusp right here. This is one of the ones that's making me wonder whether I'd be watching the show if I wasn't podcasting about it. I did mention to one of our fellow defenders, I was having a discussion with them about something that happened much earlier on in the season, which was one thing I'm noticing with this Punisher is don't make a judgment too quickly in an episode. And this is what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to live by my own advice and not make a judgment too quickly. Because right now, if it was based on this episode, I don't like Amy. I don't like Frank at the end of this episode. I think Frank has made some decisions in this episode that I think are pretty harsh and way too far. You know, coming back after beating up and killing these people and smacking somebody's face in and getting home to Amy and Amy asking how it goes, and he does a big smile covered in blood and 2 thumbs up. Haha, isn't that hilarious? Well, it's not hilarious for me. I don't really like characters like that in a lot of films. So yes, I'm not going to make a judgment of this episode. But if I was to say, would I move on if I was watching this and I wasn't podcasting about it? I probably would leave it for a few weeks before I went on to episode 6. This episode was a bit too brutal. We did get some great moments for characters I really do like. Having Madani have that moment in the therapy group, I think was really, really important and really, really good. I liked seeing Billy kind of come back out, from the scared little child that we've seen for the last few episodes. Kind of interesting to see what it is that's motivating him a little more in this episode. That's really good. 2 things I particularly didn't like in this episode. They used a really bad trope for me. The Pilgrim's wife who's talking to Eliza and saying, I've sorted everything out except for this one thing, and then the camera cuts off and it goes to a different scene. I'm like, why? Why do I need to wait for next episode to find out what that line is? Give me something at least to grab onto as to what it could be in reference to. Does she regret not putting her kids into Catholic school? Does she regret not buying that summer dress when she was a kid? It could mean anything or it could mean nothing. We don't need any more hints at what could possibly maybe be going on in the Pilgrim. We're 5 episodes into the show. We've seen them every episode. We need to know some grounded things about their life. We got that bit in there. And the other one was at the gym, as I mentioned, when that first conversation happening between the 2 characters, and the Russian realizes that Frank's not the one he's after, and Frank realizes it's not the Russians he could be after. I know I'm a bit of a peace and love kind of guy, but why the hell was there a fight where he pretty much looks like he killed about 4 people after that? They had a conversation. They pretty much nailed it all. Frank could have walked out, and he didn't. He just went into the fight. That felt like it was just put there to satisfy a bit of bloodlust that the audience might have had because this got a bit too talky in the episode. So probably not one for me, but I'm definitely not going to come back to this episode. But I'm still going to be obviously carrying on with the rest of the season, and hopefully they'll continue on the trend that we saw in the first 4 episodes of the show. That is it for our defense for the episode. Fellow defenders, let us know what you thought of this episode and of the rest of the season so far. Just email us at feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com if you've watched the full season and want to tell us your thoughts. Or join us over in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/defenderstvpodcast. We've got some spoiler posts up there for the episodes we've watched so far, and you can tell us your thoughts on each individual episode as we go.
So with that, on to some feedback.
Yes, our first piece of feedback is on episode 1. Again, some additional feedback after we released our episode on episode 1. Jamie Alexander says, I'm pausing my binge watch to catch up on the podcast. I'm glad I'm not the only one who appreciated how unbeat up John Bernthal was in episode 1. It was nice to see him clean for the first episode, because I don't think he's been clean again after that episode. Just blood and dirt and everything thrown at him, and bruises and cuts since then.
We also got some feedback over on episode 2 from our Facebook group. Robert Phillips said, I enjoyed this episode with Frank in his natural state as a guerrilla warfare expert. The evolution of Runaway, I Was Your New Character. I imagine she will have multiple names for multiple reasons. I was slightly surprised she didn't set off an alert at the police station, which I expect to be a scene of carnage and only half standing by 5 minutes into episode 3.
Well, we know now it wasn't exactly as you thought it would happen, which is really good. So it wasn't completely destroyed 5 minutes into the episode. We did get a good siege in that episode.
Yes, and it was only the back door that would really explode.
Exactly.
To be fair. Alex Anderson also wrote in and they said, 2 episodes in and I'm enjoying it very much. Plenty of action and mystery. I'm very excited to see how things are going to play out for Frank and the new characters whose name I haven't bothered yet to learn. Curious to see how Microchip and Karen will factor into this, if at all. Not completely sure if I'm buying Billy Russo's amnesia. I think he's definitely remembers everything. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, well, hopefully, I talked about this in episode 2. I do want to see Microchip, but I know Derek was saying better let the past characters be past characters.
Well, Micro particularly is what I was saying. He's a character, I think his story's finished.
That's true. But hopefully, like I said, we get that scene where he kind of fits out Frank with a few new gadgets. Karen, I believe Deborah Ann Wall had tweeted that she was involved in this season. I know she was at the premiere, so I'm hoping that she will come in at some point. That then puts a question into when all this occurs, but we'll play that game when she appears in the episode.
I think it's an interesting one because Karen as a character is someone that's always mentioned when someone like Matt hasn't turned up to say hello to her when he's been around her area. So I kind of like the idea that she has a really different relationship with Frank, so he may bump into her just to say hi because he's in New York. Because it's a kind of a kinder relationship with Karen than Matt did when they first met, I suppose.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Some further feedback for episode 3 from our Facebook group as well. Robert Phillips goes, Assault on Cabin in the Woods 13 was a cracking episode. I'm pleased we had so many survivors and marginally heartened by the returned $5. Ex-gang leader Pilgrim is a very unreformed scumbag, I think, and I'm assuming we'll hear more of him. Honestly, I was surprised by the dovetailing of the storylines in this episode. I expected to get to 6 before they met, but I'm not upset by it. Yeah, I did really enjoy the dovetailing of the storylines in this episode, but there is a part of me that really would quite like to still be in Michigan. I really enjoyed the drift of Frank. I like that storyline. And in some ways it almost feels as though New York confines the storytelling, and maybe it's also because at this stage with all of the other Marvel Netflix shows, there's a lot of New York in these, and that's not a bad thing, but it becomes like a refreshing breeze coming through, seeing him in sort of the country doing something very different. But I really thought the dovetailing here was pretty good, and how ultimately they merge up into New York then for episode 4.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, John, because remember we mentioned that back in Iron Fist season 2, where we had a lot of them over in Kunlun, in Jessica Jones season 2, they were on the run. We saw a bit of the other city, the flashback to Karen's past and Daredevil, and it does change up the season a bit if you got an episode set outside of the city. So I know what you mean. There was a nice couple of episodes there at the beginning, seeing Michigan and now back to New York for this episode.
I think it's just because it's so much like, that classic American tale of the Drifter. Really good. And then you chuck in a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, plus you have the Pale Rider element with the Pilgrim, they think he's their savior, but he's the devil. Really, really good.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that feedback, Bob. Got a piece of feedback on episode 4, also from our Facebook group from Michael Walling. He says, I'm getting a bit of a Bullseye vibe from Billy Russo's storyline in that he's a sympathetic villain who can't help but do evil things due to psychological damage. I'll admit, though, Arthur pretty much asked Russo to kill him during his drunken rant. Anyway, I hope that Russo doesn't become Bullseye version 2.0, but someone other than a complete psycho serial killer. Interesting. I wasn't actually getting those vibes, Michael, of him being a person who does evil things because of psychological damage. I'm kind of intrigued to see in this episode anyway, maybe episode 4, I see what you mean. In this episode, I'm kind of interested that he's going back to his old ways by connecting with people that were connected to things that he was interested in the past. So I think we get a very calculated kind of killer in Billy Russo, and we're starting to get a very calculated killer. And I feel like his murder of Arthur was something he had always been intending to do. That's why he was still able to remember the address for all those years, even after not remembering all the other things that he's lost out of his head. He still remembered the address of Arthur and went there to kill him like he'd always intended. So he still feels like he's planning his killings and planning the people he wants to kill. So he does feel slightly different from Bullseye, who was manipulated into doing it more so than anything else.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for your feedback. Really appreciate it. Keep it coming. So if you want to send us your feedback for episode 5, make sure you throw it into the Facebook group, or just tweet it to us, email it to us, or send us a voicemail. Don't forget to write a review for us, because it spreads the love. It helps people find this beautiful podcast. So you can do that over on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, etc., wherever you get your podcast fix. Don't forget to subscribe at DefendersTVPodcast.com, and you can go and find us on all your channels. And we'll be back with our review of The Punisher Season 2, Episode 6, Nakasat, next Thursday, Friday.
Thanks so much for joining us, fellow Defenders. We'll talk to you next time.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, fellow defenders, for joining us. As always, it's been a pleasure. I am most definitely not off to the gym now, but when I get up off the couch, we'll speak with you again soon. Bye.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is.